question?
I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
That's right. You guys cannot handle the truth. Welcome back. June 22nd, 2020 edition of Dong City. Henry Maldonado, Vince Mercandetti, and a lot of shit going on. Vince, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you? Happy belated Father's Day, by the way, and to everyone else who's listening with children, human children.
You brought it up, so I'll show it. This is my daughter broke my limited edition rocks glass that I had, a Ralph Lauren one, and then she proceeded to break the second one. So she made it up by buying me this Yankee Stadium rocks glass set, which has the stadium and the surrounding streets, like the map of the stadium.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
I mean, I'll take that. That for like 8 years straight, I kept breaking my mom's cookie jar and then buying it a new one for her on Mother's Day. And by me, I mean my dad. So that seems like a tradition of many children. Yeah, we made it. That's the good news. We have exactly one piece of good news, I think, in this entire podcast, but we're gonna get through it and discuss it. And I think at this point it's June 22nd. For about 3.5 months as baseball fans, we've been held captive by this back and forth negotiation, even though for like 2 of those months, nothing happened. And here we are. So I thought it would be a good time right now. As of about an hour ago, players rejected the most recent proposal. We'll get to that. But I thought it was a great job to give an update on that and then actually build the entire timeline so you can put into perspective exactly where the players are coming from, exactly where the owners are coming from, and discuss that. And then I promise you, Mets fans, if you are listening, we will get to your piece of good news at some point as well. Potential good news, which, for the Mets, it doesn't mean anything until it's confirmed. But hopefully it's good news for you guys. So thank you for joining us. This is Dong City. And we have the latest as of about an hour ago, Henry, the players, 33-5 vote. I don't know who the 38 people are that get that vote, but
I want to know who the 5 idiots are.
I'm curious too. Yeah, 5 people did crack this time, but 33-5 vote overwhelmingly. They have rejected the latest offer from the owners, which came, I think, officially maybe earlier today or yesterday. It was recent.
No, it came Friday night.
Friday? Okay.
They were going back and forth if they were going to vote over the weekend. And
that's right. Yeah. Players were supposed to vote last night. They
were going to hold the vote last night, then it fell through. So
yeah, pushed it to 3 p.m. Eastern, then pushed it to 5 p.m. Eastern, then around 6 p.m. Eastern, we finally found out they had rejected it.
And I use offer in quotes because it's
right. Short. So let's start with the latest offer, and then we're going to go way back and start from the beginning. The latest offer is and this was with the caveat that Rob Manfred, if an agreement is not reached this week, will implement a nuclear option of a season starting, and it would be between 54 to 60 games. I don't know how they arrived at that number, but essentially it would be less than what the owner's last offer was, which was 60 games.
I believe that number was based on TV contracts and contractual obligations to the networks.
Okay. So it won't be 50, it won't be 60, it'll be 54. I mean, I guess it could be 60, but probably less than that, 54 to 60. It would also exclude the universal DH, which Henry and I just finished discussing. I don't really understand why that even matters. Players seemed open to it, and I think he gave players the option to keep it if they wanted to. It would also eliminate expanded playoffs in 2020 and 2021. Latest on that was we were going to have 16 teams in the playoffs this year or next year. That is now off the table with this offer. And a little thing buried in here that not a lot of people paid attention to, and we'll get to this in the beginning, of that $170 million we've touched on Dong City kind of over the last few months that owners had given as an advance to players on their salaries. Owners would demand basically 137 of that million would count towards player salaries. So they've already paid 137 million of what's going to be paid this season. They're forgiving 33 million of it, 33 million of it.
How nice of them.
Yes. So, all of that said, the qualifying offer would be restored, which I'm a fan of because the Yankees have 3 big free agents this offseason potentially. 2021 expanded playoffs and DH are both at 2021 expanded playoffs and DH, like I said, both at the players' discretion. Otherwise, only if under 50 games are played, salaries are not guaranteed for unplayed games. So basically that means if the season was under 50 games, salaries would not be guaranteed. As I'm getting my lawn mowed at 7 p.m. 25.
Is that what I hear?
What's that?
Is that what I hear?
Yes, that's the lawnmower. In case anyone can hear that, I apologize. I don't control when the landscaper comes. $25 million playoff pool for 2020 and 2021. MLB was allegedly flexible on that amount. It's all for naught. Players rejected the offer.
Yep.
So I thought a good exercise now would be, let's go all the way back, Henry, to March 12th. That is the first time we got any news on this season. So before March 12th, they were in spring training. They were playing spring training games, gearing up for the season, and then COVID comes and starts to rear its ugly head. The nation starts to head into various quarantines, and eventually players are pulled out of spring training.
This is really I think this is the only point in the entire timeline that everyone was on the same page.
I have that point exactly circled. We'll get to. It reminds me of that Simpsons episode when they play the Ralph gets his heart broken by Lisa, and they keep playing it on TV, and he's like, you can pinpoint the exact moment he had his heart broken. That's kind of what these negotiations are like if you're a baseball fan. March 12th, Rob Manfred announced the season would be delayed by 2 weeks. So at the time, COVID was not a very big danger. We were just delaying the season by 2 weeks. I guess I don't really know in hindsight why they would think that would be okay, but I guess maybe they thought it was like a fleeting virus.
Maybe someone, said something like it'll just disappear and one day it'll be gone. Maybe they were taking their cue from higher powers in this nation. Who knows?
Perhaps someone of great leadership declared that this was a non-issue, that it was under control, and that it was not going to be a problem.
Yeah, I don't know who that could be.
Anyway, 2 weeks pass, no real updates. March 26th comes, 2 weeks after the March 12th announcement from Manfred that the season would be delayed 2 weeks. He probably got out of bed and was like, oh shit, I have to give an update. It's been 2 weeks. Players agree. This was the last time that they were amicable. Players agreed to a prorated salary based on games played, and owners agree on an advance of the aforementioned $170 million. So what that means is that they basically agreed to an 81-game season, half the season. No start date or anything declared, no safety protocols or anything, but they agreed on half a season, and owners were going to give a $170 million advance to the players so they can keep obviously earning money while this was happening, and then the season would come and everything was all honky-dory. In exchange, players agreed not to sue for their full salaries, which is an important note kind of as a precedent to all of this. Players agreed not to sue for their full salaries because they're losing, again, 50% of their pay right off the bat, sans $170 million. If there's no season in exchange for a full year of service time based on their 2019 numbers. So players said, we won't sue for the 50% we're going to lose this year, but we get our arbitration and our service time and everything like that. That all stays intact. Owners are like, great, doesn't cost us any actual money, so that's cool. And that's where we were at there. Now, a line in this agreement, and this is what has caused all of the problems since, states the Office of the Commissioner and Players Association will discuss in good faith, keep that term in your head as we talk throughout this episode, the economic feasibility of playing games in the absence of spectators. So there was basically an out that if we can't have fans, they were smart enough to include that in there, then they have to negotiate in good faith to have a season and work out the numbers without fans. If and when conditions exist for continuing the 2020 championship season, which I assume means playoffs, all players signed to MLB contracts will be paid a daily prorated salary. So they'll basically be paid for the playoff games that they play. Which means most players, well, actually less than most players, since now we have an expanded playoff, wouldn't be paid at all. So that was the first big data dump of information that came on March 26th, and that was the verbiage you've probably heard a million times since.
So I think it's important to note here that this is an agreement that this is a terms that they came to agreement. At this point, no matter what was happening in the world, this is an agreement that they came to Everyone was happy when they left the table. March 26th, owners were happy, players were happy, and then everything goes downhill from there.
Yeah, and I remember at the time when that happened, I was a little taken aback that it was so easy, because it's not like players and owners haven't had a great relationship really since Manfred took office. We covered his legacy last week. But, since that 2018 offseason, there's been a lot of animosity when players were basically just getting stiffed on their
I think that last extension, which was right before Manfred, I don't think he was in office.
2016 was the last one, so that was under Manfred because he took over in 2015.
That was the last one that they kind of felt slighted.
Yeah, and that's where we got this glorified salary cap with the luxury tax penalties.
Correct.
And now that that's played out, the way the owners have handled that has pissed off the players. So, yeah, so there was animosity before this, but March 26th, we were pleasantly surprised that everyone was acting like adults. They came to an agreement, and this seemed like it was going to be an easy fix.
It seems like they were operating in good faith.
Yeah, that seemed like good faith. April 7th comes, so this is 12 days later. Not much of an update, but they're starting to discuss the different types of options they could have to get back on the field as COVID becomes more serious. Because remember, April was the spike for the Northeast in particular, but most of the country suffered the most in April with the cases until recently. That was the day that the Arizona bubble plan was first reported, in that all teams would play in Arizona. So that was our only update then. On April 28th, which was 3 weeks after that, MLB realignment plan was introduced, and Henry and I sat here and we went over how happy we were because the Yankees would play a bunch of pushovers.
Yep.
And at the time, that was the biggest deal going on in MLB because nobody thought we just would have the situation we're in now. So now we head into May, and this is, Henry, when things start to go very downhill. On May 11th, owners approved their first proposal, which was not percentage-based. It was percentage-based, but it was revenue-based.
Right.
They suggested 50% revenue sharing in an 82-game season, but it was rejected by players because it could resemble a precedent for a salary cap.
Right, and at that point, I think that was a player's first mistake.
Yes. Now, if you look at every other sport with a salary cap, it is based on revenue sharing, so you can see where the player's thought process was there. Which
was foolish because, let's be real, baseball annually, the revenue just keeps going up and up and up. So I think that's where they shit the bed.
I kind of agree with you. They probably should have explored that route more because, like you said, MLB for 17 straight years has had increasing revenue, setting a record-setting $10.7 billion last year. So, granted, in 2020, it probably would have been lower than the $10.7 billion. But 2021, especially if they agreed to the expanded playoff and everything, if that was included in revenue sharing, there was a route there they probably could have explored more, and they didn't. MLB books. Now, this is one of the reasons I think the players did reject it. MLB books are not public, except for the Braves because they're a public company. But even the Braves, like all of their revenue streams are not public,
right.
Just the operational ones as it relates to the Atlanta Braves. So like anything else that's related to the Braves but doesn't have to do with the game-to-game operation, that's not public.
Subsidiaries.
Right. So within the offer was expanded playoff that was also introduced, regional schedules, and expanded rosters with the taxi squad were introduced. And those were all amicable to both sides. So no one disagreed with the taxi squad, no one disagreed with regional schedules, and no one disagreed with expanded playoff. That was kind of all in agreement right off the bat. The main thing was the revenue sharing, and I think players rejected it, A, because it might be a salary cap, precedent for that, and B, because MLB books are not public. So how can you really know what your revenue is and split it if they're not actually open to the players union? That was the theory behind that. So now in true Florida fashion, I have a thunderstorm as well as landscaping. May 14th, 3 days after that, MLBPA asks MLB to open its books. So logically, MLB is like, all right, you want to talk about revenue sharing? MLBPA is like, all right, show us your books following the revenue proposal. MLB
That's not happening.
Yeah, MLB flat out refuses. But this is when we first hear from like the Cardinals owner and everyone else that they're insisting MLB isn't as profitable as claimed. And no formal proposal ends up being made in regards to revenue sharing. So they never officially made that offer because players resoundingly rejected it immediately. And the owners then refused to open their books immediately. And then they were like, yeah, but we don't make that much money. So, like, you know, there's no reason for us to do that. Okay. May 26th now, 12 days after that. Owners make a new proposal. So this is again, and we had mentioned this then, we're going like 2 weeks at a time before we're getting proposals here as the clock starts ticking on the season, because everyone knew we were probably looking at like a July 4th-ish start date. Now we're in late May and running out of time, but the proposals are not like, you know, coming in hot. This one discussed health and safety protocols really for the first time.
Which is about 2.5 months into COVID.
Right. Yeah. And it includes daily temperature checks, self-isolation of positive testing players, travel restrictions on the road, and the no spitting or sunflower seeds, which again at the time was a hilarious controversy compared to now. The official sliding scale proposal. This is the moment, Henry, when things went very far south. Yep. Owners wanted to introduce a sliding scale proposal, which included 90% pro rata for smallest salaries and 44% pro rata for the most expensive, thus punishing the best players in the game who generate the most money. Those are the players' words, not mine. And this is also when we can start looking at the actual numbers being introduced here. This proposal, if you add everything up, was 23.9% of the original 2020 salaries. So if you looked at what players were going to be paid, owners' first proposal that included actual pro rata numbers, they were offering to pay 23.9% of that original number. So that's important because as we go through now, all of these offers are going to pretty much have percentage based. That's something that was their starting point, 23.9%.
Which is laughable. It's just an insult.
Yeah, I mean that's less than half what they agreed to in March.
You couple that with we're losing money comments. It's just tone deaf.
And Michelle, we don't have Bauer's Twitter up in front, but if you want to start leaving comments as to what he's saying, we will throw a few of those out there and dissect it because we both love Trevor Bauer's Twitter. And not surprisingly, on May 28th, a couple days after that, players respond furiously. Max Scherzer, Marcus Stroman, and Trevor Bauer and especially come out. They start tweeting. They're casting doubt on the season for the first time. So May 28th was the first time either side mentioned that, hey, this may not happen because we're so far apart right now in negotiations. And we also hear for the first time a small contingent of owners may not want a season to happen. It was rumored there was like 4 to 6 owners, which I think now has since become 6 to 8. Who didn't want a season at all because it would save them money. And we know shithead Bob Nutting is part of that, as well as some of the other owners.
Easily.
Yeah, there's just no chance he wasn't involved in that. So now we get to May 31st. Shit's really starting to hit the fan. The union counters with – and this offer is kind of ridiculous, but it's I know why they made it. So the union counters, and they're like, look, we want full prorated salaries, which that part's not ridiculous. Yeah. But we wanted over 114 game season. So they're like way apart on that. And the regular season ending through October. So the players, is the first time they started messing with the timeline. They're like, we can just extend the season a month. We'll play, no problem.
See, I like that one because it does 2 things. It puts out into the public that the players want to play more games. But what it really is, it's a fuck you to the owners because there's no way that was going to get approved because there's no way the owners were going to pay that much money.
Yeah, this was almost like, screw you guys. Like, you want to make shitty offers? Look at this one.
Right.
And we'll see you resoundingly reject it. So owners, standing behind the guys, this is a smart move for them, standing behind the guys of a second wave of COVID, which we're now seeing now as opposed to November. That might be like the 6th wave by then. They demand the season ends by 9/27, so anything after that is a non-starter. So owners, that's their line in the sand. They're not extending the season, and they're using COVID as the reason, which, legitimate or not, that was their reason.
Right.
This is where we establish that, and this is an important point, playoff revenue is valued at $787 million. So I've gotten that question.
Say that again. Say that shit again.
$787 million just on the playoffs alone. The reason that I bring that up is because I've gotten that question a lot. How much are the playoffs worth? Because that's been a big source of contention. Players agreed to the expanded playoff to make as much money. Now, this is, by the way, May 31st playoffs are worth $787 million. We'll get to that in a second. So that is the number that is included in the playoff that owners would mostly split. Because if you saw that $25 million share and whatnot, that's the player's share.
Right.
Overwhelmingly what owners would be making. So when they say $600,000 a game, which we don't have any proof of as far as what it would cost them, factor $787 million into that because that's their playoff revenue. Right. If the playoffs were canceled, as in we played the season but the playoffs don't happen, the union also included $100 million in player salary deferrals between 2020 and 2021 for anyone making $10 million or more a year. The reason that that's important, Henry and I discussed way back then different ideas, and that was the first and last time deferred salaries came into play. Yeah. Players were the ones saying it. They said if there's no playoff, you can take $100 million of our salaries and you can pay it back to us with a little bit of interest in 2021 instead to alleviate some of your financial concerns. Which not really a player concession, but worthy to note.
It was a smart move. I didn't like it at the time, but digesting it, doing more research, it was a smart move.
Right. Now, the actual proposal in the 114 game season is 70.4% of the original salaries. So we know that that's an FU because players basically added 20% to what they agreed to in March, which was 50% of their salaries. They're like, here's 20.4%. Now we're demanding because you guys are morons.
That same March agreement that at this point no one is adhering to, by the way.
Correct. Now we get to June 8th. So again, something pivotal. An entire 8 days passes before anyone reacts to that player's offer because I think at that point, both sides were so pissed off by the negotiating here, they didn't want to come to the table. But June 8th comes 2 weeks ago. And MLB finally counters with a 76-game season, but not fully prorated. Players would receive 75% prorata if there's a postseason, guaranteed 50% if there's not. So they're only offering half of a 76-game season, not half of a regular season. Playoff expansion was officially suggested at 16 teams because originally it was 14 to 16. Now we have settled on 16, which adds an extra round of playoff, or at least a few extra games. And no draft pick compensation is first introduced for free agents. And this is also when Rob Manfred makes maybe his biggest mistake in this entire process. He promises with 100% certainty there's going to be a season. And that really gets the fans and all of us going.
He goes Broadway Joe. Everyone gets dong excited. And that he put his foot in the mouth big time.
Yeah, an absolute boneheaded move from a negotiation and leverage standpoint to basically paint himself into a corner and be like, I've got to come to an agreement because I promised there'd be baseball. So here we go.
He only did that because he knows he had the nuclear option in his back pocket.
Yeah, he knows he can force baseball now.
Which, for the record, and I know we've said this privately because this shit drives me absolutely mad. That nuclear option is bullshit because the whole time, after they agreed to the terms on March 26th, no one is adhering to that. No one's saying we're going to follow this. Everyone's saying it's not the same deal. Let's throw it out the window. And the owners are magically saying, well, this one or two sentence in that we're going to hold steadfast to in this language in that agreement that we all of a sudden don't recognize, we're going to stick fast to that.
Yeah, and players have a counter to this that we'll get to in a second here that's about to get introduced. But to summarize that proposal, by the way, the actual proposal is 35.2% of original salaries with playoffs, 23.4% without. So the owners actually went down 0.5% in guaranteed salaries in the regular season of the players with their second proposal. Mm-hmm. And it was still about 47% away from what players were suggesting in their proposal. No change in regular season pay except for that 0.5%. And this is when the mention of the nuclear option was introduced, 48-game season from Manfred. That would be, if they implemented it, 29.6% of original pay. So it actually would cost the owners 6% roughly if they did the nuclear option. but it would get baseball there. It would save Manfred's ass, and it's still 40% away from the players' proposal. And this is also where now the players said, okay, you want to play that game? Yeah, you can introduce yourselves the nuclear option we agreed to in March. We're going to go back to that verbiage in March, and we're going to point out the line where it's agreed to. You had to negotiate in good faith to have as long of a season as possible, and you're throwing out these offers here that are 40% away from where we are, and they're not for as many games as possible, because at the time on June 8th, there's no reason to cut the season at 76 games. You could still play 90-some-odd games, 95-some-odd games at that point. Owners are just refusing to pay. They're also refusing to open their books and prove why they won't pay.
Not to mention that
grievance is introduced.
Yeah, not to mention each one of the owners' proposal, the percentage of salaries the players were getting paid is the same. They're just moving the goalpost. They're playing funny math, but at the end of the day, the number that the players take home is the same number. So they're not really altering their proposal. They're just playing with the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. They're moving this 23-ish% around. They went to 29, but that's only with the nuclear option. So that wasn't really a negotiation. That's just what they would be forced to do. So now we get to the next day, June 9th. MLBPA counters with an 89-game season fully pro rata. This is really important for a few reasons. The anger stems from money tied into qualifying for the postseason. So the MLBPA is all pissed off because basically the owners are like, we're not really moving on anything in the regular season, but in the event we have a postseason, like here's all this money you can make while we're making that bigger portion of the $787 million. So they're basically just taking it out of their fat wallet and being like, you look at our wallet a little bit. But by the way, there's no guarantee there's a playoff. And by the way, we're the ones who decide whether there's a playoff or not. So the proposal includes expanded postseason, $5 million in contributions to minor league charity, which we're going to touch on this second, focused on social justice, and a $50 million flat fee for cancellation of the postseason. So players are saying, you want us to make all this money in the postseason, you at least have to, there's a fee there if we don't have one. You have to pay us at least the $50 million. And so the actual proposal here is 54.9% of original salary. So players in back-to-back proposals went down 15.1%. They went from 70% to 54.9%. Remember, owners have not moved. They actually went down 0.5%. So players make a big concession of 15.5% between their proposals. So that, to me, is good faith negotiating. If you're going down 15% from your original proposal, owners have yet to do that. So keep track of that. But also mentioned in this was the minor leagues, $5 million minor league charity. By the way, during this entire process, MLB canceled 40 minor league teams, which is going to save every single one of them money. And
they cut the draft.
They cut the draft from 40 rounds to 5. So all that money you would need to pay those players, that goes back into the owner's pockets. Players don't see a dime, and players lose a bunch of jobs over it. So keep that in mind, too. That had to equate into the millions, I would think, probably tens of millions, if not.
I was going to say way into the millions.
Right. So owners have lined their pockets and have not moved on negotiation at this point, while players have given up 15%, and now they're getting close to that 50% that they had originally agreed to anyway. We moved to June 12th, 3 days after that. MLB counters with a 72-game season and a max pro rate of 83%, a minimum of 70%. The extra 10 to 13%, again, is in the postseason. So after MLBPA just said, hey, we don't want a lot of our money tied into the postseason, MLB comes with an offer that ties a lot of their money into the postseason, 10 to 13% of it, blatantly ignoring MLBPA's objections and keeping concessions financially about the same. So this offer is 36.9% of original salaries with postseason, but 31.1% without. So they came up 2% from the nuclear option, and they've come up about 8% from their original option. So there's a little bit of concession there from the owners for the first time. June 13th, union pissed off again that MLB is just ignoring all of their requests as far as negotiating goes. Kills the negotiation and makes that declarative statement, tell us when and where, which you saw tweeted a lot from Bauer and everyone else.
Like Trout.
This is with the caveat, which a lot of people missed out on. I've been getting personal comments about this, and I had to point it out. This is with the caveat they're going to file a grievance. So when you say things like, oh, the players promised, just say when and where, and now they're rejecting proposals, it's because the owners are making those proposals with the caveat they drop their grievance. The grievance now is their biggest leverage. So when they say when and where, they're saying, yeah, we'll play your 48, 50, 54, 60, whatever game season you're saying, but we're going to file a grievance because you haven't really done any sort of negotiating to make the season as long as possible. The nuclear option, by definition, is not making the season as long as possible.
Not to mention the fact that they're tying that into any new agreement. It tells you that they're deathly afraid of going to court.
Yes. So as a result of that, now the owners have sat back, and 2 days later, Manfred makes the statement, which was like a week from his original statement, saying there may not be baseball. Exactly 1 week to the day.
Yep.
MLB then demands MLBPA drops threat of the grievance. So you can tell it really pissed off the owners and scared them a little, because the first thing they did before they even made a counter proposal was say, you have to drop this.
You got to drop your grievance.
And Manfred was willing to throw away the entire season 1 week after he guaranteed it over this grievance. So now 6/17 comes. This is when we got a little bit of joy for a little bit of time. After the face-to-face meeting, which no one knew about, between Tony Clark and Rob Manfred, a new proposal, and this is the best offer the owners have made, of 60 games fully prorated, is made with the season starting 7/19. It's also the first time we hear of a set-in-stone start date, under the condition that the players drop their grievance. As well as the universal DH would be included, that extra inning change where a runner starts on second base would be included. It comes out to 37% of the original 2020 salaries and a 16-team playoff expansion. So the best offer the owners have made is essentially giving the players a 13% pay cut in exchange with the no fans in the stands. And we'll sum that up in a second. The union the next day responds, and this is 6/18 a few days ago, responds with a 70-game proposal. So 10 games more, fully prorated, an increase in playoff money, $50 million in bonuses in 2020, and a 50-50 split of new postseason revenues in 2021. We'll get to in a second. This is following a $1 billion agreement that owners made in that span for the 2021 or for the expanded playoffs with television.
Right.
So they're getting an extra $1 billion. The difference is estimated at around $300 million. So players basically are now like, there's an extra $300 million there for players. That's what they're negotiating over. Owners refused to negotiate since they thought the previous proposal was an agreement. So basically, players said, hey, pay us for 10 extra regular season games. You just got $1 billion extra, a 14% increase on playoffs revenue with the expanded playoffs. And the owners were like, no.
Billion.
Yeah. And that proposal, for the record, would be 43.2% of the original 2020 salary. So the latest player offer was a 43.2. So they actually came down almost 7% from what they agreed to in March, and came down an astounding 26.8% from their original proposal, which we'll get to that in a second. So 6/19 comes, like I said, MLB says it will not counter. And in addition to that, COVID has started to spike, and coincidentally in the areas that they thought were the safest, Florida, Arizona, Texas, the 3 states that were discussed. Now the South is having their COVID spike. Owners moved back into the position to implement a shorter season on account of this, being the opportunists that they are. And the union issues a statement saying the league refuses to play more than 60 games, and players are committed to getting back to work ASAP. So they're basically, players are saying, there's no point in arguing. They're not going to go over 60 games. Just, again, tell us when and where, implying we're not dropping the grievance.
Right.
6/22, that is today. Like I said, we already went over this. They rejected the 60-game proposal. The players did. The nuclear option's expected to be 54 to 60 games. They're going to drop the expanded playoff. They're going to drop the universal DH. They're going to drop the extra inning rules. And then we went over all that. So in total, for those counting at home, and this is a very important point, if you get anything out of this, this is what you want to hold on to. From the first offer to the last offer, owners went down 13.1% on their offer.
And the players?
26.8, more than double. Right. So when you make statements like, I'm mad at both sides, or this is the owners and the players' fault, or they're both greedy, or they're both full of shit, or it's millionaires arguing with billionaires, whatever you want to argue, remember those two stats. Players have more than double conceded what the owners have as it pertains to money, and they're coming from a smaller pot to begin with because they're worth less than the owners.
So basically there's only one side operating in good faith.
Right. And the difference now is 6.2%. That's all we're at. Those 10 games, 6.2%. And the players already said they're willing to negotiate between 64 and 66 games. So really we're talking about 4 to 6 extra games of pay, and they won't do it. That would have been 3.7%. So we're at 3.5% is all the owners have to come up on. And we probably would have an agreement, and they refuse to go over 60 games. Yeah. So that's where we're at. That is currently. I know it's a very long math lesson. Now we can go back and get to your comments.
So they're greedy fucks, basically.
What's that?
So the owners are basically being greedy fucks.
Yeah. So now we get into the grievance part because, I've gotten questions on that. Why is this grievance even matter? And players are estimating the grievance is worth about $1 billion in money they would get on the aforementioned agreement that we covered, which is that owners are obligated per their agreement to negotiate in good faith as long of a season as possible. Players feel they have a good case that this hasn't happened. We just went over the numbers and feel that that's probably a legitimate case to it. But here's the worst.
Probably closer to a slam dunk if their owners are begging them to drop it.
Yeah, you can tell by the owners' actions, probably a little scared that this could happen. It's an independent arbiter. It's not someone assigned by MLB who would decide on this. And here's the worst part of all for the owners. If they go down this road and it goes into court, guess who's going to be legally obligated to show their books? That's the biggest thing in all this. It's not even so much that the players win and they get $1 billion or a portion of the $1 billion. It's that this is a long play for the CBA after 2021, because if you, between now and then, get owners to have to open their books and show all of their revenue,
it's a wrap.
It destroys their leverage going into the next CBA, and there has to be an agreement in the next CBA, or else we'll never see baseball again.
No, this is where we're at. We're at the point where that's what they want. They want the owners to show their books, because this isn't about this season. I think they've taken the L. Both sides have taken the L on this season. They know they're going to play 50 to 60 games. They know they're going to get paid for 50 to 60 games. This is about next year, where the CBA comes up, and they can get a look at those books. If they can see how much money they're truly making, then their leverage is gone. Not to mention you have the whole pissing contest of this. Whoever feels like they've lost is going to go extra hard in the CBA.
Right. So now Rob Manfred and the owners have two choices. One is to implement this nuclear option, in which case it's going to be looked at terribly, I think, by fans. I would hope by fans. If they go and say you have to play 48 games, no one ever agreed to anything. I mean, that to me is, first of all, it's an insult, because we know the owners literally decided how many games there are, and that's not enough games for fans.
They've been operating with the number of games in their pocket already. They already know what they were going to play with.
For me, I said way back when half of a season was legitimate to me. I think baseball inherently has a very large sample size. So if you're going to tell me you'll cut half those games out, I think 81 games is still enough to decide who the best teams are for that year. And especially if you're including an expanded playoffs, even those teams who might have gotten hot, they're still in the playoffs. You have to win a very long postseason with 16 teams. I would have been fine with that outcome. Whoever won, unless it was the Astros, I would have been completely okay with that team being a champion. I would remember them as a champion, no questions asked. You're talking 30-game difference from the 95 Braves, and not a single person on earth considers them an illegitimate champion. So that would have been fine. 60 games was like my gray area. I don't know about you, Henry, but at 60 games, I was like, maybe, but
I never really thought of it, because I thought we would have close to 100 games.
Yeah. 48 games, 50 games, 54 games, whatever you want to call it, is not that doesn't do anything for me. And we've seen that in the comment section too. That isn't enough for baseball fans. None of us would give a shit.
Yeah.
At
I mean,
48 games.
we'd still watch, which I think if we really wanted to stick it to them, we'd stop watching and watch the ratings go down. But with COVID, no one's going to be going to the game, so ratings will probably go up. But if we really gave a shit, we'd stop watching.
Right. Michelle asks, what do you think would be better for a grievance case, Manfred implementing the season or canceling the season? I think, and Henry, you phrased it best, players have kind of fallen into a great opportunity here in that Manfred really kind of looks bad either way. But I think, to answer your question, Michelle, that if he implements the season, it's going to look worse for the grievance, because that you look at the big timeline and it's like owners got what they wanted all along, and what they wanted all along was as short of a season possible. And when the grievance is based on you have to negotiate for as long of a season possible, that to me looks bad. I'm not an arbiter. I'm not a CBA lawyer. I'm not a union lawyer, but that to me would look bad at its surface. Whereas if he didn't implement a season, at least you can then, if you're the owners, be like, yeah, well, they weren't negotiating in good faith either. We couldn't reach an agreement. But they both kind of look bad. There's no real winning there. What do you think on that?
I think that's what it's about. I think there's no winning, and this is all about money. I did want to address Joe's comment. He says he keeps hearing owners will have to show their financials. There's no legal precedent. I think once the owners started claiming that they'll lose money and they're operating under the assumption that they're going to be losing revenues, I think they opened the door for that precedent. This may very, very well be the precedent.
Right. Yeah, it's not a guarantee. But I think that that is going to, in the nature of what this is, which is a negotiation that we really haven't seen ever. Precedents get set. They aren't based on anything. So I think that in this case, with what the negotiation is, what the language states, the actions that both sides have taken, there's a case there.
Yeah.
Whether it happens or not a guarantee. I mean, look, Henry and I guaranteed baseball this entire time, and we can't guarantee it anymore. I still think it's going to happen. But we can't guarantee it anymore. We don't. All of this is now new territory for every fan living.
What's funny is that we keep talking about the money aspect. We keep talking about negotiations. We keep talking about all the pissing contests and everything in between. We're not talking about COVID.
Right.
Which like Florida is getting killed. It's over 3,000 cases a day for the last week.
Right.
Arizona's getting killed. All these places where they thought the hot weather would kill the virus and we could just go play baseball with every team, those places are hotbeds right now.
Yeah, the Yankees and Mets have moved back to New York, which if you had asked 3 months ago, no one would have predicted that. They want to do their spring training in New York because New York right now has lower cases than Florida.
Dude, our governor playfully floated banning people from Florida coming into New York.
Right, which our governor had done that earlier. He
Exactly.
said, stop flocking to Florida from New York because we don't want you. Like, it's not safe.
Look, then you had 40 players over the weekend that came in.
I was going to say, in this process, not players, but 40 staff, I think. I don't know if it's necessary.
It's a combination of staff and players.
Right. 5 Phillies.
And I think,
in particular, 1 Astros player.
Yeah, they said 10 teams were affected. I think the majority of the teams have shut down their facilities to sanitize and have the players quarantined. And I think this whole thing, this is really the first time where I'm like, okay, maybe we don't get baseball. And I say that with, even if we do get baseball, we won't get baseball. Right. I think we're going to have a lot of players, and this is something not spoken about. I think we're going to have a lot of players just choosing not to play. And there's no legal recourse for the owners to force them to play. I think you have players that are going to say, I'm not playing. I'm not putting myself in danger. I'm not putting my family in danger. I don't want to do it. So you're going to have that. Then you'll have a grievance. It's a clusterfuck.
It is. And fans are kind of on the losing end of all of this because now we're definitely not getting a legitimate season regardless. And now you can really look at the end of 2021 and say, I don't see any scenario with a grievance that's currently pending in court because it's not going to be solved this year.
No. I think the minute Manfred implements the nuclear option, the players file a grievance the same day.
Right. So you're going to have a grievance tied up in court. You're going to have at best an illegitimate season, at worst no season at all. And you've got a CBA extent, and you only have a year. We've seen how these guys negotiate. It's not like they're going to. It's not like they are not going to take this time to sit at the table for the next year, for the next 10 months or 9 months until next spring training and negotiate. It's not going to happen.
You know what would save their ass? The same people that save baseball all the time. You and me.
Yeah.
The fans that make thousands of dollars to pay the millionaire salaries for the billionaire owners. The only way that would happen is if next year people miss baseball so fucking much that they go and sell out every ballpark, revenue is at an all-time high, and they sit there and they're looking and like, okay, guys, we can't fuck up this again. This is way too much money to fuck up. And they are forced to go and sit and make an agreement because the amount of money that's made. And the only way that happens is by the common folk, by you, by me, by everyone watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, buying games, going to the games, buying merch, filling concession stands. The normal everyday folks will end up bailing out the billionaires like always.
Yeah, that's essentially what's going to happen. Joe had asked a number of warm weather cases of COVID spiking. Do you think the entire season will not occur due to state-by-state restrictions? I mean, COVID's now a factor.
Yeah.
And there's certainly, you can't, I mean, even the NBA now with their return, because it was supposed to be a wide world of sports, like it is definitely a factor. Will that be the reason there's no baseball? I really don't think so. I don't even think that'll be the reason that will be the reason there's no football, if there's no football.
I wonder which sides lawyers will get smart enough and then blame it on COVID.
Right.
So that they don't take an L in court.
The thing about COVID, and I hate to get morbid on this, is that the death rate has really improved. Like we'll use Florida for an example. We've had over 3,000 cases most of the time for the last 2 weeks, and a lot of people are saying if it continues for the next week, that's when you start to see hospitals get overrun, and then like things could get really ugly.
But there's a lot that goes with that because you have people that are not players that travel with teams. You have broadcasters who are off there in age. Yeah, they're very vulnerable. You have trainers who are, a lot of the trainers for these teams are guys in their 60s and 70s. So you have those. You have the broadcasters. You have some older staff members. There's a lot. One player gets sick, you fuck a whole team. Where does the schedule go from there? That's
kind of where I'm getting at, is that the death rate has improved. I think, and medical community will tell you this, they've improved on how to treat it. There's not a shortage of hospital, like New York in particular had a really bad shortage of hospital beds and vents when this was happening. They didn't have any way to combat it. That's not really the problem in any of the states right now with huge spikes. So the death rate's way low, but Major League Baseball's a responsibility, and we already have 40 players who tested positive. So can it play a factor? Yes. My gut feeling is that they can find enough combinations between all of the states and stadiums at their disposal where they can make it work, which is why I don't think that'll be the reason there won't be a season, but that might be the reason they use as far as why there won't be a season.
But here's the thing with that. You have the CDC guidelines say if you test positive, if you have symptoms, you're to be self-quarantined for 14 days. If you come in contact with someone who has been positive, you have to quarantine. One person gets sick, that's the whole team.
I think the MLB agreement, though, is only if you test positive. I don't know if they'd actually quarantine players who have been in contact. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's a very slippery slope. And it's ugly. They really ruined their moment of opportunity here was to negotiate in May, come to an agreement, start in July. And if there were spikes, they could have adjusted kind of on the run, but everything else would have been in place. Now you have nothing in place. Manfred, Michelle, to answer your question, I think he has to use the nuclear option from a commissioner standpoint. Like we talked about his legacy last week. It's already pretty ugly, but you will be remembered forever as the commissioner. I mean, think of Bud Selig. The two things we think about when we think of Bud Selig's entire legacy is not any of the good he did for the game. And keep in mind, during his entire tenure, MLB generated more and more revenue. That, as a commissioner, that's what everyone tells me. That's the biggest thing for a commissioner, make money for the owners.
And had labor peace.
Right. What do we remember from Bud Selig? Two things. One, steroid era. Two is no World Series in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two things. He'll live forever. Those are the two things fans will remember. And if you ask any fan, not that they love any commissioner, but they hate him. If you look back, and Selig did a lot more good.
I bet you if you tell them you can have Selig over Manfred, and everyone will say yeah.
Every single person. So if Manfred now has no season at all, which has never happened, and you're looking at potentially another strike in 2022 as a result of no season at all this season, that is, I mean, he'll be tarred and feathered out of the sport.
I think if the players, I think more than you, COVID is a big issue here. I really think that the players can just say we're not showing up.
Right.
We don't want to take the health
right to, because again, it's their health, which is
absolutely.
One of your points.
They're the only people who are going out there to play. The owners aren't.
Yeah. Brian points out the All-Star game tie as well. Yes, that's the other thing that you remember Bud Selig for. This whole thing, by the way, reminds me if there's any musical fans out there. Henry, have you ever seen The Greatest Showman?
No, I haven't.
So The Greatest Showman's about P.T. Barnum, played by Hugh Jackman, and basically the dawn of the circus, like how he invented the circus. There's a song in there where he meets his eventual partner. He wants to like bring respect to the circus because there's a bunch of freak shows and like people, throwing peanuts and stuff. The entire song called The Other Side is a negotiation between the two. And it reminds me so much of the Players and Owners, because what pisses me, it's my favorite song in the entire soundtrack. What pisses me off is Zac Efron plays the other partner, and he gets screwed in these negotiations. The only thing I can dwell on, despite that I like this song, because Zac Efron starts at like 7%, and Hugh Jackman starts at 18, or Hugh Jackman starts at 7%. Zac Efron starts at 18. They settle at 10. I'm just like, I look back, I'm like, damn, he got raked over the coals. And then I look at this, and people are like, oh yeah, players and owners equally culpable. No, we just went over the stats. Players have conceded more than twice the percentage the owners have. Reminds me of that song.
And again, another thing that doesn't get spoken about a lot is they just killed the free agent market.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing that kind of sucks about this whole thing is even if we had a season, even if everything counts, the Mookie Betts trade, he plays for the Dodgers, whatever, everyone gets their pre-arb. Owners, if they have to concede anything, and they've already, again, conceded technically some percentage, they're going to make up for it. That's the other aspect. Like, I don't know why people root for the owners when it comes to the actual negotiation, because they're going to make up for it anyway.
You're not going to see you're not going to see big free agent moves this offseason.
Garrett Cole is the luckiest man on the face of the earth because he cashed in before this happened.
Mookie Betts may be the unluckiest.
Yeah, and Mookie Betts, you're right, is the yin to that yang. Well, no, he's the opposite of that. He is going to get screwed.
Think about it. We were talking about just last year. We were talking about how if Bryce Harper got what he got, how much more money Mookie Betts would get. And look,
Mookie Betts was looking at 400 plus.
Remember, at one point, people were saying Bryce Harper should take a 1-year deal and then go back in the market.
Yeah.
That's why you get your money when you can. A lot of people shit on players. You get your money while you can. This is why Scott Boras is Scott Boras. You get your money. You get what you can when it's your time.
Absolutely. If Mookie Betts put up his 2018 numbers this year with the Dodgers, or something close to it, I don't expect him to put up those numbers in LA. He would have gotten $400 million. As it was, he was definitely getting at least $350 because he was definitely getting more than Bryce Harper.
He was getting the Bryce Harper contract plus.
Yeah. I thought he was going to be about $360, and if he had another MVP type season, probably about $400, maybe $410 because Trout got like $426 or whatever he got. Now I have honestly I hate to say it because you just said they said it about Harper. If I'm Betts, I take a 1-year deal and I see what happens after the CBA.
You have to, which sucks because he gets 1 year less in his prime, so he'll pay for that on the back end. But you got to do what you can to.
And it'll be what
him. I go back to the Dodgers and say, hey, give me my whatever the ARB number was that we settled on. Give me that, and I'll play for you for 1 year.
Yeah, give me another $27 million. I'll play for a year. And then I'm gonna become a free agent, guaranteed. I'm not signing an extension unless they gave him, that, but I doubt they would. And then he heads into free agency a year older. I think he'd still be like 28 or 29.
Although if now that I'm thinking about it, if you're a smart owner, you can front load these contracts so bad right now, and or like I've been saying for years, if I'm a GM, if I'm an owner, I'm offering a guy more money annually and paying him less years. So I'll give a guy $40 million, $45 million a year for 4 or 5 years, as opposed to giving them 35 for 10.
That's what the Dodgers tried to do with Bryce Harper.
I would do that.
It was like a 5-year, like $200 million deal or something.
And I think you'll start seeing deals like that where owners go, okay, we want to sign you. We don't know where the CBA is going. Money's tight right now. If you did this, we'll pay you now, but for less years.
Right.
Players are going to sit there and they have to really think about that.
What fascinates me, Dodgers and Yankees in particular, with the Mookie Betts situation, because if you're the Dodgers, you did give up Alex Verdugo. So, you cleared a spot essentially for Mookie Betts. Granted, as a rental, granted, they were going to be all in this year. But they are going to do what they can, I think, to re-sign him, and they will have the money to re-sign him if they wanted to. Now, here's the part where I'm going to kind of shit in some Red Sox fans' cereal. They have been saying, the not so obvious conspiracy is that Red Sox fans feel we can give up Mookie Betts for essentially nothing. I mean, they received players, but he's not going to play in LA. He's then going to become a free agent, and then we can re-sign him.
Yeah, no.
This is still the thing that I haven't seen answered anywhere, and I've looked everywhere for it. If there's no season, Mookie Betts does become a free agent, but what happens to the luxury taxes? For example, we use the Yankees and Red Sox for an example, first ones who come to mind. The Yankees exceeded the tax. They already got punished in this draft, losing their second and fifth round draft picks, whatever it was. But will they get screwed with the other ramifications, the international pool money and everything like that, by exceeding the luxury tax threshold? Because now that even if it's pro rata, they're not actually doing that. And the opposite of that, the Red Sox were looking to reset their cap this year. Does that still count?
I think it counts because if you're the Yankees, it's actually beneficial because you're not adding money on via trade or anything. At the end of the year, you're letting money go. I think Damon's gone this year,
reset
right?
their cap?
Yeah. If you're under, yeah.
But everyone's technically under because it's prorated.
Well, they would prorate that portion, but if they would. So who started the season? If the season started regularly, there was 2-3 teams over? No, like 4 teams over the cap. The Yankees, the Dodgers.
And I'm talking about the highest tier here.
There was 3 or 4 teams that were already over the cap.
Right.
I mean, those guys. I think Ellsbury comes off. Tanaka comes off.
The rest of it, $16 million comes off.
Tanaka comes off. There's a lot of players that come off that they can reset the cap without making a transaction.
Well, we'll look at the Yankees, for example. They've got Paxton, Tanaka, and LeMahieu, and the rest of Ellsbury's money coming off.
Right.
I'm assuming they are going to want to re-sign at least 1, if not 2 of those guys.
I think they re-sign on 3.
Right. That's kind of my gut feeling. Are they going to re-sign? Now, the Yankees are a little less – whether they reset the cap or not, I think the Yankees want to keep that core intact, especially if they don't get a chance at a World Series this year. Like, what's the point of spending all that money and getting Garrett Cole if you're going to lose 40% of your rotation?
Especially when I think James Paxton, because of all this, can come at a bargain.
Right. I agree, DJ LeMahieu and everyone else, too. I mean, everyone should be at a bargain. Like, there's just not going to be that type of market for these guys. But the Red Sox, Red Sox are in a spot where if the tax does get reset, right, because they never really had to, like the Yankees in 2018 had to lose payroll so they can reset the tax. Red Sox did that this winter, but they didn't have to go through the year suffering from it.
The Red Sox come off like fat cats. I mean, they got rid of an expensive player they weren't going to sign. I don't care what anyone says. Mookie doesn't want to go back to Boston. If he wanted to stay in Boston, he would have legitimately signed a deal. Mookie doesn't want to go back. Mookie said he wanted to test free agency. He's not going back to Boston. They got a top-tier prospect. They freed up money. They came out on top of that.
Yeah, I guess I agree. Either way, whether they reset the tax or not, I don't see them extending Betts, especially because they're not the only team in town that's going to want Mookie Betts. And, yes, even if they get away with a free reset where they didn't have to suffer for a year under the tax and they're going to have more money come off this year, that's not going to be their best way to allocate it. They don't have any pitching. And Chris Sale
For the
gets to
Angels?
spend the year recovering.
Boston, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, Moogie's going to the Angels, man.
Now the Reds get screwed, and the Red Sox. To me, Trevor Bauer has Red Sox written all over him, especially if he's only signed 1-year deals, like you said. That is a classic guy that they're going to sign next year, and they'll probably sign a second big starter too.
My feeling on Trevor Bauer is a lot of talent, a lot of things there, but there's a few wires loose, man. I'm not sure how that plays here.
Yeah, for sure.
Even now, he's on Twitter talking shit, and I'm sitting there thinking, you're a guy that doesn't believe in free agency. This is where you need to shut up.
Right.
Let the people who actually care about it, just let them talk. He's tweeting, and he's making no sense because, again, you know where he comes from. You know what he believes in or doesn't believe in.
Yeah. So let's get to the last part here. That is the Mets. So, James, if you're still watching, or anyone else who is a Mets fan, there was a rumor today that the Mets have a serious team assembling to buy the ownership away from the terrible, terrible Wilpons.
Terrible. With
A-Rod and J-Lo essentially being the window dressing minority owners who would get all of the credit for being owners, much like Derek Jeter and the Marlins. Led by, you're telling me it is not the Under Armour guy, right?
No, it's the Body Armor guy.
Body Armor guy, yes.
The Body Armor and the founder of Vitamin Water, who then sold Vitamin Water to Coca-Cola for stupid money.
Right. So
his name is Mike Repo, and this guy has deep pockets. He has ties to New York. He graduated St. John's. He is a St. John's booster. I like this, man. I like this a lot. I think I actually hope this happens. I know we playfully go back and forth. Oh, this guy also, he created Pirate Booty. The chips, the little puffy.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. Good. I like that.
Yeah, those are good. But he, I think while A-Rod and J-Lo have the star power, his pockets, he tried buying the Mets in 2011, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. This was his second
He did make an offer. I think this is what the Mets could use as a franchise. I think you have A-Rod, who is a lightning rod. No matter where he goes, no matter what he says or what he does, the guy's a lightning rod. J-Lo is adored by everyone from old women to young women to children, men, of course. Everyone loves J-Lo. They can sit there and
New York ties, by the way.
Yeah, they can just sit behind home plate, and they'll draw, the Jerry Seinfeld. They'll draw big names. They'll have big pockets. They'll have star power, and I really hope this deal goes through for the Mets. They deserve it. The Mets fans deserve some real ownership, and it'll be fun it's always fun in New York, man, when both teams are rocking and they're going for the same free agents, and then they're both playing well. There's nothing like New York when both teams are playing well.
Right. I'll preface it by saying, yes, I hope it goes through. I'm just of the general belief I want as many good owners in my sport as possible. Yeah. I don't, if you've been listening to this show, you know that I hate most owners, but there are better owners. I think obviously the owners of the Yankees and the Cardinals and whatnot, as far as being owners, forget what they are as people. Those are good owners. They try to compete. They have revenue to compete. They do what they can. They don't try and skirt the system at all. And it's not just big market teams too. I mean, the Cardinals are like a mid-market team, but you've got good owners out there who know how to run a business, and they know how to run a team, and they know how to get the best of both worlds. The Mets haven't been that for years and years and years. They went to the World Series in 2015 and almost immediately fell apart after they lost. They went to the World Series in 2000. They haven't been able to sustain anything really since the late 90s. And unfortunately for them, the Braves were better than them in the late 90s. So they kind of
2006, man.
Yeah, and then 06.
I always say, man, that Andy Chavez catch, man, when that catch happened, I said they're going to the World Series.
I thought so too, and I was rooting.
That
I was in college. I was rooting so hard for them in that game because everyone's
that
like,
Andy
"I was
Chavez
thinking the Cardinals
catch,
would
his
win."
arm was like a good 2-3 feet
That
past
was
the fence, man.
unbelievable.
Brought that shit back.
That was the Odell Beckham catch of baseball in that it was made in a losing effort, but all anyone ever remembers about that game is not Yadier Molina's ninth inning home run,
Mm-hmm.
but it was, or whatever inning, it was Endy's catch.
Like I said, man, his arm was so far behind the fence, and he brought it back, and it was the end of the inning.
His entire arm was over the fence. You just like you see a lot of ticky-tacky robbed home runs or like a piece of the glove. His entire arm went over the wall.
Yeah, as a baseball fan, you were rooting for that, and I just you think, well, after 2011, I stopped thinking that way. But you think that sometimes there's destiny and stuff like that. Baseball gods and that kind of shit. But when that happened, I'm like, that's such a momentum swing. They're winning. They're going to the World Series, and then the home run happened, and it was over.
Now there's so many other emotions I have about this, just like comically about Mets fans, is that now they're like A-Rod, they're going to be the biggest fans of A-Rod, which cracks me up. A-Rod's a steroid user, which cracks me up because we've heard shit for so long about the Yankees and their steroids.
It'll be funny. We'll rib them. We'll have fun with it. But it's hard. I don't see it happening because the other ownerships of the other teams, they're very guarded. It's a good old boys club who they let in.
They reject so many good owners.
Mark Cuban twice. If you remember, Mark Cuban had the highest bid for the Dodgers. And then all of a sudden, the secondary group, which included Magic Johnson and the current owners, all of a sudden their bid was slightly better than Mark Cuban's. Come on. Mark Cuban said he's done trying to buy a baseball team.
To be fair, though, I mean, those were good owners too, but I agree. The Mark Cuban thing comes to mind. They have basically banned him from ownership, even though he's proven to be a great owner. I hope it happens for the Mets. I agree with you. I like, New York in general needs better teams. It's such a major market, major city, and they've got like 10 teams and 8 of them suck.
So when I think of MLB owners, you know what I think? The Simpson episode, Grandpa yelling at the clouds?
Yeah.
That's the MLB owners. They're the old man yelling at the clouds. They don't want polarizing owners. They learned their lesson from George Steinbrenner. They won't have a George Steinbrenner type of owner again.
Right. As Joe said, it means A-Rod's not announcing. I like A-Rod as an announcer.
I do too. I like him behind the mic.
He's got a little Tony Romo in him, though, where like
I was gonna make that same comparison. There's a way he can dissect the game and the situation, which actually pissed me off more because you can see how great of a baseball mind he is. And I'm like, dude, you came up, this, and you came up empty so many clutch moments for us. Like, come on.
And you wonder how that translates to ownership. But I will say this is what I find fascinating. The Jeter A-Rod rivalry would continue into ownership.
Yes, it will.
And I feel like A-Rod's going to win that battle. Not just because he has the better market.
He has the better market.
I think he's a better baseball mind than Jeter is.
I think so. I mean, he's in a better market to begin with, but I like mostly all of the moves that the Marlins have made. The Marlins are putting together a really nice franchise.
Yeah, this is no Jeter. I'll defend Jeter's job as whatever job he has in the ownership, whatever role he's playing, which I think is player related. I'll defend that to the death. I think the Marlins rebuild has.
I think his official title is president.
Yeah. So he does have a hand in all of this, but I love what the Marlins have done. The only, the Yelich trade looks like it's a total disaster. But other than that, I mean, he still has assembled a ton of talent in there. Yes, he did some unsavory things as far as who he fired, as far as who he's not paying, whatever the case may be. But
he cleaned house in a way that a lot of people didn't like, but it needed to be done.
Right. And it was a very Derek Jeter way to do it. He was kind of ruthless and focused and efficient. But I love what Jeter has done. I just think A-Rod absolutely loves everything about baseball, and he's extremely knowledgeable on baseball, whereas Jeter, I think it is more of a business for him. Even as a player, it was more of a business.
No, I agree. I think A-Rod would be the guy in the Mets clubhouse. You remember the mirror, the Central Park mirror when he was?
Yeah.
I can see him doing some dumb shit like that. And he'll get the back pages, but that's what someone as polarizing as A-Rod does. Sometimes he takes the attention. It's like Joe Madden. Joe Madden always takes the attention off of the players and onto himself.
Right.
And I think A-Rod as an owner will do a lot of that. They don't want sound bites from a player. They'll want a sound bite from the owner who used to be a player, who used to be a hell of a player.
Yeah, he'll do a lot of talking for sure. Joe touched on my point though with Romo and A-Rod. It's not all rosy for me in that sometimes they just talk too much.
It's hard, man. When you know the game so well, it's hard not to talk about it with a passion, and it's hard not to be arrogant. If you're that successful on a level that these guys have been successful, and they can break things down that we can't break down as fans, you're gonna be arrogant.
Yeah, I just look at it from a broadcast journalism standpoint. It's like that bothers, like just the presentation and production of it. Those are their flaws. But to your point, they are both very knowledgeable, and that's why I think he could do really well as an owner. Especially if they're going to have the purse strings of what the Mets should have, which is high market purse strings to actually be able to invest in their core and extend their core. Like that's really, to me, the only advantage of big market baseball. And there's a lot of disadvantages too, is you can extend your core past the age of like 28 or whatever when they become a free agent. That's the one major thing I'll say the Yankees have been blessed with. They were able to hold on to Jeter and Posada and Pettit, more so Jeter and Posada forever, because they can afford that. It doesn't always work out. There's plenty of times when they extend a player and then they have to pay for their terrible years. But that is a major advantage. The reason that I always will argue, especially with Dean Gavin or with Dean, whatever his name is, the Royals fan in the group, is that there's plenty of disadvantages too, including the mandatory requirement to try and win. Like you can't just disappear for 3 or 4 years and rebuild your farm system if you're a major market, because the pressure is there with the prices you're charging to win. Luckily for the Yankees, it worked out. The rebuild was like 3 months.
Well, the flip side to that is those teams also tend to put their money back into their product.
Right.
Whereas the smaller market teams, they put it in their bag and they keep it moving.
Right. That's what is annoying is a smaller market team can afford to invest more, and they do when they're competitive, except the Pirates, who will just destroy that franchise immediately as soon as they become competitive. But they don't. They pocket the money. They get paid money from big market teams that they don't reinvest into the team, and they can afford to be bad for years on end because they're a small market team and they're not held accountable for it. And then on top of that, you're getting top draft picks every year, which if you're a team like the Rays is great because they make great selections. But if you're a team who isn't like the Rays, then it isn't great because you squander these picks. Or you're like the Padres where you have 100 great picks. You finally have a great farm system, but it took 20 years. So
you don't hit.
Right.
You don't hit on those picks. Like the Astros got lucky because they hit year after year on those draft picks when they tanked.
Yeah, they made great draft picks and they raised their payroll. I mean, that's the deal to me. If you're a small market team, when you are ready to compete, when you've got that 3 to 5 year window, you absolutely have to invest in it. Even if you're going to take a loss year to year, you have to invest in it. Because we've seen, like with the Cardinals, they now have a brand of winning. They can keep reinvesting because they keep winning, because they keep going to the playoffs and they keep generating more revenue.
They were able to let Pujols go and really not feel the brunt of that.
Right. Yeah. They've earned that right. So, anyway, that was a tangent there on small versus big market baseball. But I think A-Rod with a big market payroll, especially, they can do some damage there. That combination. You got deep pockets and you got A-Rod.
I want to see. If it's not J-Lo and A-Rod, I definitely want to see the Mets sold to someone who's passionate about bringing a winning brand to New York.
Right.
For their sake.
Reminds me of, what was his name, Mikhailov, the Russian owner who took over the Nets.
Oh.
That was awesome.
I know you're talking about.
It didn't work, but it was awesome. He came in, I forget, I think it's like Mikhailov or something. He came in promising the Nets were going to be like this premier franchise for the rest of existence.
And he had a way of speaking too.
Yeah, and he's got like this, thick Russian accent. He's this big Russian businessman, so it was intimidating, and you like believed it. It didn't work out, but that's the kind of owner I want in a big market. So if they're going to come in and make declarative statements like that, as long as it's not like, oh, we're going to be better than the Yankees or take over, like just stop. Unless the Mets have a dynasty, don't make the Jets mistake, man. Don't make Rex Ryan's mistake of saying he's going to take over the city and the Giants win a couple of Super Bowls, you win nothing.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something about his foot fetish being exposed.
Yeah, I mean, that blew up. That gets underrated. Giants win a Super Bowl. Jets never make a Super Bowl. Mark Sanchez becomes a bust. Rex Ryan gets fired. That's what happens when you make that statement. There are definitely teams in the New York market who are king, and then there's the teams who are second fiddle. And until second fiddle wins things and becomes king, you can't make statements like that. So that's my only advice.
I still have the foot fetish thing in mind.
It's-
You were in Florida, man, but that shit was all over the papers. That was on
what
Sports
year?
Talk
That
Radio.
was what, 2010?
And I think so, man. The whole foot fetish thing was the headlines were
I think
great.
I was in Connecticut at the time. But
Man, Rex Ryan foot fetish was the best.
yeah, that was a great time to be in New York in general.
Yeah.
Like 2007 to like 2012 was a nice time.
By the way, Rex Ryan should have an opportunity to coach again in the league, but that's another issue.
I would think, yeah. So, Eddie coming in here asking to talk about how good Mike Trout is. He's not very good. He's got a 0 batting average right now. We're not playing baseball, and I'm still mad at Mike Trout for his stupid comments back in March. So that's what you'll get out of me about Mike Trout.
Mike Trout did join the caravan and when and where.
Yeah, that I respect. If Mike Trout wants to be a Players Association company man, I can support that. Good for him.
Yeah, he should do that, and he should tell Trevor Bauer to shut up.
yeah, assert your dominance.
Go play with a drone.
By the way, some late updates here. It's been 2 weeks now. I have not worn any sort of baseball hat. Reason is minor protest. We'll see if it continues as my hair gets longer. Second thing, sporting.
I had to wear one as the ceiling fan light shining on my thing.
I see that. Second thing, we've got Trenton Thunder going on here. That's also a protest. That's minor league baseball for you.
I kept it classic with the goat of relief pictures.
It's a good call. Good call.
And
Third thing, I'm now as cool as Henry and Randy. I've got Baseball Life back there. If you can see it, my banner arrived minutes before the show, immediately put it up. So now I've got Baseball Life in one corner, and I've got the Dunks or the Bronx Bang Bros 2018 Fantasy Championship for Baseball Life in the other corner. So
I did, before we wrap up, I did want to give a kudos to Nelson Cruz. He did win the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award at the virtual ESPYs yesterday, and they did a nice kind of a video montage of all the stuff that he does. I know he's trying to build a school in the Dominican Republic. So kudos to him. It was a very emotional moment. I'll post a video in the group once we're done, but yeah, that was really nice to see.
Yeah, that is great. Good for Nelson, the elder statesman at this point of the league. 40 and still putting up numbers in Minnesota, of all places.
Whose PED use gets swept under the rug?
Oh yeah,
David Ortiz's.
User, probably still a total roid user, but good for him. Last thing, we've got Wednesday, a couple of podcasts you're want to tune into, Step Back and The Lab, usually on Wednesdays. I actually died The Lab, but I don't want to spoil anything. It may be live. And by live, I mean Johnny and Matt will be in the same spot. I don't know if that's happening this Wednesday or a Wednesday in the future, but Matt Whelan will be in Florida for a while, so we will all meet up with him at some point. The Florida contingent down here, which consists of me and Johnny and some other members. So look out for that. I don't know if they're going to announce it, if they've set a date yet, but like they're getting married. But yeah, tune into The Lab Wednesday and Step Back also on Wednesday in their semi-new slot. They've been putting out great product. Definitely something to tune into. If you're not in life,
the Step Back is one of my favorite podcasts. They're getting some steam rolling.
Yep, Leon and Jacob do a great job. If you're not in Ball is Life, if you like basketball, even in the least, it's worth going in there. They do some fun watch parties and stuff like that. It's a little bit of a different feel, I think, compared to the other sports groups we have in life groups.
I agree. I'm always jumping in and freaking in the comment section trying to take over. I might as well just be on with them, but yeah.
Yeah, so you've got that. The Lab, obviously, if you're not in Food Life, definitely go into Food Life. They post things. I'm hungry all the time. And and then we've got the Audible. There we go. That's on Friday of this week, as far as I know. So look out for that. Randy Hammond, Matt Bushnell. If you're a football fan, definitely please go into Football Life. And if you know football fans, please invite them into Football Life because that group really needs to grow considering it's football.
Yeah, they rebooted that podcast strong, man. They came out the gate swinging.
Yeah, they. If you haven't heard Matt and Randy discuss X's and O's of football, it's really something you want to do. It's obviously not as great as Henry and I discussing baseball, but it's like a close, it's a close second.
Oh, and by the way, if you want to ruffle his feathers, just remind him how good Josh Allen is and will be.
Yeah, like triggers for Matt. Mention terrible Bears quarterbacks and draft picks. Mention Josh Allen and how great he is. Triggers for Randy. Just mention anything positive about the Giants, and he will immediately just be short-circuited. So
Yeah.
there you go. That's reason to tune in. You can troll them in the comment section. Anyway, this has been Dong City. Join us next week. It'll be the day after my birthday. I'll be a freshly minted 33-year-old. Monday, 7 p.m. Still plan to make it there. So we will talk to you next week.
Dong City, bitches.